Conspiracy theories are most often a smokescreen to divert us from the true evil.
My dad was right. This family's money is dirty.
Imagination is far more fascinating than reality.
Welcome to Working for Uncle Henry, the podcast. I'm the series author and your narrator, Angela Mullins. Well, in the previous chapter, I strolled through a cemetery narrating notes to use for descriptions of Willow Hill Cemetery. For this chapter, I did an overnighter in Amtrak business class. I don't recommend that. Chapter 27. Eager to debrief Jennifer after the Paris incident, Henry made numerous attempts to contact her, but received no response. He needed to know what Zachary had said to her, so he tasked Parker with traveling to Manhattan to check on her. Parker wasn't overly concerned about her. After all, it was Jennifer they were talking about. Her lack of communication couldn't be that odd. But no one had heard from her since the return from France, and that ordeal still nagged Parker. Nightmares of being locked in a dungeon, freezing to death, and drowning to the sound of water dripping. What had happened between Jennifer and Zachary? What if Zachary had located her in New York? Her celebrity status wouldn't make it terribly difficult to find her. What if she had been kidnapped again? Zachary wasn't likely to make the same mistake, allowing her to get away a second time. Parker felt sick to his stomach as he started considering the possibilities, and the train ride allowed plenty of time for contemplating and imagining. He took his seat in the business class car of the Northeast Regional and casually studied the other passengers. May as well get some situational awareness practice in. He still found it difficult to focus on anything else while surveying his surroundings. Maybe if he kept practicing it, it would become second nature to him, but right now his brain struggled to catalog people, doorways, signs, luggage, and the like while doing anything else. The steward registered his face in her mind and quickly scanned his ticket from his phone. He had packed Orwell's 1984 to read, so he retrieved it from his backpack and settled in for the 8.5-hour journey. The blur of other trains speeding by on either side provided a sense of thrill, but he was still unaccustomed to the swaying and squealing of the train. Orwell was unsuccessful at keeping his mind occupied so as not to speculate on Jennifer's possible circumstances, but the more he read, the more depressing it got, and the more he thought about Jennifer, the more worried he became. He closed the book and prayed silently for her protection. One by one, the announcements came over the PA system for each stop along the way, more passengers getting off than on most times. How much longer? He pulled out his phone to track the trip. Eventually, the view of factories, truck yards, forests, and the few neighborhoods unfortunate enough to live near the rail line gave way to the emerging skyline of Manhattan. It was a fascinating sight. One more place he never really expected to see in his life. "Welcome to Penn Station," came the greeting over the intercom. The stainless steel sterileness of the station was disappointing, but outside, a beautiful evening was developing. The sun's rays streamed between the towering skyscrapers while a herd of yellow cabs awaited him. Magically, but not without horn blowing and streams of profanity, his cab slipped through the standstill traffic that looked more like a parking lot than a street. He didn't mind the slowness, it gave him time to take in the sights. Penn Station and his destination were south of Times Square, so he missed that, but he was able to catch a glimpse of Macy's as the taxi circled around, and a giant billboard of Jennifer in skimpy underwear. Parker looked away and sighed, then briefly glanced back as it disappeared from view. The drive soon took them along the Hudson for a couple of miles and past Battery Park before pulling up to Jennifer's apartment building. He was sure he saw a famous face or two carrying groceries out toward the pier or boat slips on the other side of the street. God, please let her be okay. Protect her from those monsters. He paid the driver and walked apprehensively inside. "May I help you, sir?" the doorman asked. "Is Miss Vincini in?" "Is she expecting you?" I don't know. I've left messages, but she isn't answering. I'm her cousin. Her aunt and uncle in Virginia are concerned about her and sent me to check on her." "Colonel Archer?" "Yeah." The doorman lowered his voice a little.
She hasn't been out in a few days. She does that sometimes.
He stopped to consider the situation.
Although I am surprised I haven't heard anything from her by now.
Mr. Brownston had been a doorman at River Towers for many years and was fond of Jennifer, yet another man wrapped around her finger. He had learned her habits and the trouble she might get into.
Has she had any visitors?
Parker hoped the answer was no.
There's been some coming and going by some of her friends, but not in the last few days. Why don't I go up with you and we'll make sure she's okay?
He seemed convinced now she should be checked on. The only entrance to her apartment was by private elevator up to the 40th floor penthouse. The elevator opened into a foyer. Brownston rang the doorbell. No answer. He knocked.
Miss Vincini, haven't heard from you. Is there anything I can get you?
No answer. Parker rang the bell, then knocked.
Jennifer!
No answer. You have a key? He asked Mr. Brownston.
Well, yeah, but...
Open the door, please.
But
if she's not in there, we're right out and no one will ever know. If she's in there, then she needs help. Brownston took out his master key and unlocked the door.
Miss Jennifer, we're coming inside. I just need to be sure you're okay.
A strangely mingled odor of cigarette, marijuana, alcohol, spoiled food, and vomit enveloped them as they stepped into the apartment. The remains of a lively party cluttered the otherwise modern decor of white, black, gray, and chrome. Empty bottles, partially eaten food, ashtrays, and clothing led a trail through the rooms. The downstairs floor was vacant. A crash rang out from the upper floor, followed by a thud. Parker raced up the floating steel staircase and through the open doorway of Jennifer's bedroom. Mr. Brownston was a little more reluctant, knowing the frequent male company Jennifer brought home and the subsequent goings-on involved. He wasn't sure he wanted to see what might be in there. What they found was Jennifer alone, lying on the floor by her bed in her underwear and the remains of the Scotch bottle that had just fallen off the nightstand. She had followed suit in an attempt to catch it. She peered up at them, stared for a moment as if deciding who they were, then burst into laughter. Brownston grabbed one of the stained bed covers and rushed to cover her.
Are you okay, Miss Jennifer? Sorry to barge in on you, but your cousin and I were concerned.
Brownston offered her a hand to help her up. Jennifer waved him away.
Thank you, Brownston. I'm fine.
Her slurred speech suggested otherwise. Parker stood back, assessing her condition.
Will you leave us alone for a few minutes?
Brownston tipped his hat and silently headed back downstairs. Jennifer squinted up at Parker, trying to focus her eyes. He stepped a little closer, but still a few feet away.
What happened? I had a party.
Parker scanned the bedroom. It was as trashed as the rest of the apartment.
Must have been a really big one.
Jennifer laughed and reached for the almost empty Scotch bottle beside her. The duvet Brownston had wrapped around her slipped off her shoulders.
Parker, you haven't come to preach a fiery sermon, have you? To save my soul from hell?
She gazed down at the Scotch bottle.
My life is hell.
He wanted to preach to her. The life of Jennifer Vincini might not be as glamorous as it seemed to the world, but it was far from hell. She didn't begin to know what hell was like, yet he hoped she never would.
No, I was worried about you.
That's sweet. Her sarcasm shifted to tears. Jennifer was not one for tears. She could count on one hand the times tears had maneuvered their way out of her eyes.
Hey,
Parker dropped down to the floor beside her and put his arm around her, pulling the duvet up again. "Hey," he repeated because he didn't know what else to say. Jennifer dropped her head on his shoulder. "Do you love me, Parker?" "Yeah, of course I do." "I believe you. You're the only one who truly loves me." "Well, that's not true. You know that's not true." She stared into his eyes that almost glowed in the dimness of the room. Her makeup was a full-face mess, but partially hidden by the tangled mess of hair hanging down in front. "Henry and Edith love you, probably as much as they do Caroline. We were all worried about you, afraid Zachary might have grabbed you again." At the moment, he wasn't sure which would be worse, kidnapped or this. They sat there silent for some time, forehead to forehead. Then Jennifer mumbled something about her father. Parker couldn't make out what she said and didn't want to ask. He knew Vincent Vincini was not a pleasant subject for her. "How about you get cleaned up, and I'll see about cleaning this place up." He helped her up, and she strolled zombie-like toward the bathroom, dropping the duvet on the floor and reaching around her back to unhook her bra. Parker rejoined Brownston downstairs. He surveyed the damage. "I hope she has plenty of trash bags," he said as he started picking up bottles and cans. "Oh, no, sir," Brownston protested. "I'll call the cleaning service to take care of this mess. They know what to do. I'll need to call Dr. Marzoli and the colonel, too." Parker looked at him questioningly, surmising this wasn't the first time the doorman had seen Jennifer this way. "What?" "Your uncle arranges for Dr. Marzoli to take care of her when she's—" Parker sighed. "Strung out and drunk?" Brownston didn't reply. "Who's Dr. Marzoli?" "Private Rehabilitation Services." "Well, how often does this happen?" Only a couple of other times." Parker pursed his lips. "Only?" "Go ahead. Do what you need to do, what you're supposed to do." As Mr. Brownston hurried to his duties, Parker glanced out to the garden terrace, more bottles and cans and articles of clothing, etc. Empty bottles and glasses were scattered on the terrace bar. He wandered out to get a breath of fresh air. His mind inventoried the debris. He couldn't help but wonder what exactly had gone on here over the last several days. His heart broke with every glance, every thought. She couldn't possibly be happy living like this. A tear came to his eye, then another and another. He had failed her. He tried to be a light, to be an example of what a good, fulfilled life should be like. But who was he kidding? He didn't know what he wanted himself. He was confused. He knew God was real. He knew God loved him. But something churned in his gut. He needed a focus, a purpose. He wiped the tears from his eyes. What would happen to Jennifer? How many times would something like this happen before? He would never forgive himself if she died like this. God put him back in her life for a reason. He did believe that. Maybe a test for him too. But he had a job to do, a mission he didn't have a clue how to conduct. Dr. Marzoli arrived surprisingly soon. For whatever reason, Parker expected a man. Instead, a middle-aged, competent-looking woman with shoulder-length blonde hair and dark-rimmed glasses strode into the apartment. "You must be Miss Vincini's cousin." She smiled and held out her hand to Parker and provided a firm handshake. "Where is she?" Parker nodded toward the staircase. Moments later, the doctor came back down. Parker was pacing across the terrace, looking out over the bay at the Statue of Liberty standing in the distance. "You'll need to go now," the doctor said, interrupting his prayers. His hard stare prompted her brief explanation. "It's my policy. I'll slip her out discreetly." "Is she going to be okay?" "Well, that's up to her. It always is." He couldn't argue with that, but he wished he could make her see how much she needed God's help. This chapter shows us Jennifer's weaknesses. she doesn't have it as together as she would lead you to believe. Thanks for listening. Next time, Parker gets advice from Izu and Father Gigi.